Okay. I want to thank everyone for joining. We will have other folks understanding that this is Fort Lauderdale, Broward, but we do have decent branches who will be on. Some of them will be participants. Other ones will be at, like President Brown, who is from Indian River County, who I'm going to ask Pamela to introduce when she does her introductions as well. So we understand how important this information is to the work of the NAACP. And so with that, I'm going to ask our own Judge Holmes, if you will give us a quick opening prayer, because with all these alerts I'm seeing that's happening, we certainly need that in as much as there can be. Judge Holmes.
Well, thank you, Madam President, and good evening to all. Let us pray. Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your goodness and your kindness. And God, we thank you for this instructional webinar tonight. For in your word, you said that your people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. We thank God for the NAACP who disseminates this knowledge to everyone. And God, let it fall on listening, hearing ears tonight. Bless everyone involved, prosper us, keep us protected in your will. Those that are under the auspices of bad weather, God, we ask you to calm the storm. You spoke peace and things got still. We thank you for everything that you've done and that you're going to do. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. And with that, we will have our own. I know that you all think she belongs to you, but she does not. Our our Pamela Birchford, who is our advisor, she works closely with all of us, certainly the Florida NAACP. But for those of you who don't know, all of us in the field make up the Florida NAACP. And so we have her on speed dial. Well, we understand she's on the Hill, but we are checking. And when I say we have her, I mean probably all 70 of us have us on text, email, phone call to get the information, to understand where we are and what our next move is. And with that, our own Pamela Birchford. Take it away, Pamela.
Madam President, you know I always enjoy being with you and with the Broward branch. And when my phone starts to ring, I always try and answer it. So thank you for inviting us all here this evening. Immigrants are a vital part of Florida. They represent more than a quarter of Florida's civilian workers. They work and take on roles mainly in agriculture, construction, and hospitality. But they are also our teachers, our preachers, and business and community leaders. They are in our schools, our colleges, and our universities, and they are our family. Florida is among a half dozen states which each collect more than $1 billion in taxes from undocumented immigrants. These taxes help fund Social Security, Medicare, food stamps, federal programs that these hardworking as undocumented are barred from receiving. Despite the contributions undocumented immigrants make, they are at the center of a dehumanizing campaign. They are now targets of mass deportation orders. They are targeted by federal and state law enforcement. They fear family separation, returning to locales they fled for many reasons. Why is this happening? How do we make meaningful contributions to tame these activities? How do we talk about this situation and explain it to others? Tonight, we will explore a deep dive into what is happening in Florida and around the country as this heinous immigration crackdown continues. We are joined tonight by individuals who are hardworking and assist undocumented immigrants and help shape critical policy in an effect to add order and as much protection as possible. Madam President, again, thank you for allowing us to bring allowing me to bring some of my friends here tonight. We were all on the ground just recently in the Capitol during the passage of a rather destructive and devastating Immigration Act. But these individuals are hardworking. We work together all the time, and I must say, this last special session was quite emotional for all of us. With that, I'd like to introduce our guest this evening. We have joining us Tiffany Hankins. Tiffany is the Director of Policy and Politics with the Florida Immigrant Coalition. Paul Chavez, Director of Litigation Programs for the Americans for Immigrant Justice. Kathy Bone, a legislative specialist with the Florida Education Association. Alexis Montalvo, a legislative and political specialist, also with the Florida Education Association. We have Kara Gross, who is the legislative director and senior policy counsel for the ACLU of Florida. We have Nadeska Concha, who is the deputy director of communications for Florida for All. Also joining us is Indian River President Anthony Brown. And if I'm not mistaken, there have been raids by ICE in that community. So we do have a president from a branch who has experienced some of this activity and will be here with us this evening. With that, we're going to dive into a brief overview.
Pamela, just 1 second, if I might.
Sure.
We're also joined by our branch general counsel, Judge Alona Holmes, retired, and our school board member, Dr. Jeff Holness. Wanted to make sure that, anything that we invite him to, that he makes sure he attends and that he gets the most accurate information. So we want to make sure that we thank and recognize our own Dr. Jeff Holness from our school board. Thank you.
Absolutely. We also have Eric Riley from the FEA, who's on tonight to make sure we all behave and that we say the right thing. So thank you, Eric, for joining us. I am going to turn the mic over to Tiffany Hankins, who's going to give us a brief overview of actually what's happening around the nation and in the state of Florida with immigration affairs. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Pamela, and thank you all for inviting me here today. I do apologize. I am presenting by candlelight right now. My power went out, so hopefully that holds firm. I'm not trying to make a point about how the laws are trying to take us back into the dark ages, although they certainly are. I am going to try to keep things brief, even though, as you all are aware, a lot has been happening since President Trump was inaugurated. Should I go ahead and share my screen for the presentation, Pamela?
Yes, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing the option, but I will just get going. Then most of the slides were just companions anyway. So the federal and the state landscape, unfortunately for us in Florida, it has been since the DeSantis administration, a testing ground for some of the worst things that could happen at the immigration. The first section of what I wanted to talk about this evening was the promise that the Trump administration made to build a large mass detention and deportation machine, which they have been, certainly making strides to do so. Those who talk about this family separation apparatus as a way to keep communities safe, they're really, demonizing immigrants by associating them with, a rise in crime, and they're clearly being dishonest. As I will demonstrate during the rest of my talk, the moves that the administration are making is to move as many people of status as possible to make them deportable. And so the administration has, they have to revoke immigration status that has been granted to people, stripping them of previous eligibility that they had to live and work in the country. So people with deep roots to the community are now worrying about things like sending their kids to school or driving to their jobs, only to have their family torn apart in the course of a normal day through these ICE raids. One way in which the federal administration and the state working with them to do this is attempting to accomplish this feat is through what they call 287G task force agreements. That essentially allows the state law enforcement in Florida to act as ICE agents. And so the DeSantis and the legislative majority just last week, as Pamela was referring to, passed legislation that made that expanded these agreements and the penalties for any law enforcement that didn't cooperate with them. They also are working to establish here in Florida a state immigration enforcement authority. These are staffed by unelected people appointed by the governor and the state legislature. One of these appointees we actually just found is an activist sheriff named Grady Judd, who has positioned himself both in the media and in his actions as a radical anti-immigrant sheriff here in Florida. It's really he emphasizes his own cruelty in his approach to policing work by really villainizing the immigrants in his community. So that's just an example of kind of people that they're appointed as body to oversee expansion, made it so the state law enforcement can, pull people over for infractions, but then those state officials, the highway patrol, would then be deputized to cooperate with ICE and immediately put people into proceedings. Another thing that has helped in the expansion of this mass deportation, kind of the family separation machine that they're trying to build, is an executive order that was passed that ordered the expansion of what they call expedited removal. That allows the U.S. to deport someone without a court hearing and to the maximum penalty that has ever been permitted under federal law. They have expanded it to include, territory. The one thing about Florida is that the whole state is within 100 miles of a border. So even when the expedited removal zone is 100 miles from the border, that actually includes essentially the entirety, if not the entirety, of the state of Florida. So basically what this means is that U.S. Officials can stop anyone that they suspect of being in the country without documentation, and the burden of proof to prove that the person has been in the country for at least 2 years, which is what subjects them to expedited removal is if they've been in the country for less than 2 years. The burden is on that person to prove that they've been here for longer than that. So advocates have actually started advising people to carry with them documentation to prove their immigration status and also that they have resided in the U.S. at least 2 years in case they're stopped and questioned in this enforcement zone for expedited removal. Another, concerning factor in this mass deportation, the effort to build the scope of this cruel machine, is the revocation of safe spaces. I think that many of you on the call are going to speak to this, so I'll just go over it briefly. Previously, the ICE raids were not to be conducted in sensitive areas like churches, hospitals, and schools. And since that's been revoked, there have been legal challenges to the revocation. A group of Quaker Congregationalists, for example, have filed a suit against the Trump administration. But the concerns that community members have, both in all of these, whether it's the leaders in our faith community, healthcare workers, doctors who are concerned about their patients, or teachers and parents who are concerned about what their kids are going to experience when they're at school, are all looking for solutions to make sure that we can reclaim these safe spaces. So those are some of the ways in which they have been working to build a deportation apparatus, or expand upon the existing deportation apparatus. Additionally, I'm sure you're all very aware that the militarization of the border has only increased since Trump took office. The executive orders on day one called for U.S. armed forces to support the federal government's response, including, carrying their loaded service weapons, which is an unusual thing for this, for when those orders are called. A deep concern, of course, and it actually showed up in the state law as well, is that military bases would start being converted into detention sites. The beds that are needed to house as many people as they are hoping to detain would far exceed what the ICE budget currently allows for. So we already have had the Buckley Space Force base in Aurora, Colorado offer to or agree to be ICE housing for detention. So obviously, this is deeply concerning on constitutional levels as well. I think that there's the way that they have framed the need for militarizing the border, has just concerns for all of us, not just immigrants, and their definition of what an invasion is in our country. So let me see, additionally, we also have witnessed the reopening of Guantanamo Bay for housing additional detainees. The plan is to house up to 10,000 individuals at Guantanamo Bay. The Trump administration has also been using the military to do deportation flights, both domestically and internationally. The third section that I was going to talk about was, the way I referenced it earlier, the way that the Trump administration has been rolling back protections and revoking immigration status. Just today, in fact, we received the really devastating news that TPS for Haitians will be canceled, and it's every single day I have to revisit these slides and these presentations because everything is happening so quickly. But the TPS for Haitians being revoked means that many people who were on protected status, hundreds of thousands of people potentially are impacted and will no longer have the TPS protections, which will make them possibly deportable if they're not able to apply for and obtain another form of regular status. Similarly, the TPS protection was revoked for citizens of Venezuela who have come to the United States fleeing the conditions in their country. Their ability to live and work inside the United States. Now there's a group that will expire in April and another that will expire in September of this year. And I know that there's several people on this call who will be speaking to, what people can do and how they can work to work with lawyers to try to find other statuses that can secure their immigration status here. The third one that was revoked recently is around the parole programs that had been in place under the Biden administration, including Uniting for Ukraine, as well as the parole for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, and the family reunification parole programs All of those have stopped processing applications due to the Trump administration's directives. Another program that has been shut down by the Trump administration was the CBP-1 app that allowed people to schedule appointments for asylum from outside of the U.S. And wait for their appointment to apply for asylum, a longstanding practice that the international community has committed to, especially us here in the U.S. The justification for canceling the ability to apply for asylum at the border was a wild legal theory that asylum seekers and economic migrants meet the definition of an invasion. And the measures like the ban of all entries rest on the existence of this invasion and wouldn't be lifted until President Trump decided that invasion has concluded. There is a lot of, again, there are other smarter people than me on this call who can speak to the legal challenges of the moves that the Trump administration is working to make with the cooperation of the Florida government, unfortunately. But the last thing I'll speak to before handing it over to them is simply the funding for all of this. I think that when the promise was being made of building this kind of, the immigrant penalizing family separation machine, that the sheer cost of what that would look like, seemed like it could potentially be a barrier into itself. Unfortunately, the Senate GOP budget that's currently being debated, this is a current fight, so please reach out to your Congress people. The Senate Republican budget allocates $350 billion to turbocharging mass deportations and militarizing the border, while, of course, slashing critical services that millions of American families rely on. So things like SNAP that provide healthcare, food and basic needs, education, health infrastructure, all of these things are going to fund Trump's plan to prioritize raids in our schools, churches, and hospitals. And will tear families up, but roots in really struggling. The Florida state government has fallen in line as well with all this. Passed in their recent bill. They guaranteed $350 million for the state enforcement agency. And I don't need to point out to this group, surely, that there are many underfunded community services right here in Florida as well, and that this is a disgraceful use of our taxpayer funding. So that is the, unfortunately, very overwhelming to me and to others overview of what's going on with immigration policy at the federal and state level right now. So I'll pass it back over to you, Pamela.
Thanks so much, Tiffany. That was a lot, and it is as dire as we thought it was. You made reference to the fact that, we're sharing with our immigrants to be sure to carry certain papers with them so that they can identify themselves and prove that they are have been in the United States for a time certain. But there are many other things that immigrants need to know in an effort to protect themselves. So we're going to turn the mic over to Paul Chavez. As I indicated, Paul is Director of Litigation Programs with Americans for Immigrant Justice. And I know that he is too experiencing a little computer issues this evening. So Paul, I am hopeful that we'll be able to hear you from your phone. We can see you from your laptop, but let's hope we can hear you from your phone. We are not hearing you.
All right, I'll try with the mic here. Can you?
Yes, we
can. You hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to shut off my phone because I'm getting feedback. But if you can, if you need to tell me to to stop talking and move on. My speaker apparently quit, so just type it in the chat for me and I'll move on. Let me see if I could get the share working. All right, I think I'm sharing a screen. Proud to use Flick's Know Your Rights materials. I got 12 minutes. I'll do some Know Your Rights information, talk about the Florida Rapid Response Network, and then get into maybe a little bit of family protection planning. First and foremost, everybody has rights, immigrants included. There is no constitutional rights for some and not others, with very few exceptions. So immigrants, documented, undocumented, lawful, unlawful, have those exact same rights, particularly the important ones like the Fourth and the Fifth Amendment that a lot of us know about. The Fifth Amendment means that you can't be compelled to testify against yourself, which also means that you can't be compelled to talk and you don't have to answer questions. So my main piece of advice to anybody, if ICE starts asking them questions, wants to know something, is to just stay quiet. But I know that's super difficult for a lot of us because most of us are raised to be polite and answer a question. And sometimes it's, hi, how are you? And trying to get you to talk. So you could just say, I don't answer questions. And it doesn't have to be rude. It doesn't have to be like overly aggressive. Just say, I don't answer questions and leave it at that. Everybody also has Fourth Amendment rights. So you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in those private areas, including your home, your work, school, church, etc., that somebody can't enter unless they have a warrant or unless they have your consent. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. You also have that same Fourth Amendment right to be secure on your person, your papers, and effects is the way the Fourth Amendment talks about it. But it means that you can't be searched without your consent. There's an exception to that called a Terry stop. If a police officer feels that they might be unsafe, they could pat down the outer parts of your clothing. But there shouldn't be a full search without your consent. So the private places, so that's wherever you have a reasonable expectation of privacy. They're not officer isn't supposed to go in. ICE, CBP, IRS agent, FBI, CIA, whatever law enforcement agency it is, they need a judicial warrant. And in the ICE context, that's important because it's not often that ICE actually has a judicial warrant. So that means a warrant signed by a judge, dated, that actually describes the place to be searched or the person to be searched for. Oftentimes, ICE will just have what's called a notice to appear, and it says warrant in the top right corner. That notice to appear is not a search warrant. It's basically just a notice to somebody that they need to go into immigration court for their immigration proceedings. But it's not a search warrant. It may give them probable cause to arrest somebody, but not enter somebody's house or school or church or hospital. Some key points, if an immigration officer shows up at your door, don't answer the door. There's no obligation for you to answer the door at all, or even really speak to somebody. Don't give consent. Sometimes if you do open your door, you might get a foot stuck in there, or they'll open the door and they'll say, well, that's consent. Or, well, you don't mind if I come in and take a look around, do you? If you don't have anything to hide, just let me come in, then I'll get out of your hair. Don't open the door at all. Ask if they have a warrant. And if they do, ask them to hold it up against the window or slip it under the door and then review it. Review it if it's an actual judicial search warrant. Then you could let them in or contemplate allowing them in. But be sure to carefully read it and document it. If it's a search warrant, it should talk about all the specific places to be searched. So if they're searching for a person, they shouldn't be in there rifling through your drawers, rifling through your desk, because a person's going to fit in your desk drawer. So document those things. No need to fight back. The fight doesn't happen in the moment. Just assert your rights. Continue to assert that you don't consent to searches. If they say, oh, you don't mind if I take a look in this closet, do you? Say, I don't consent to searches. If they have a valid warrant, they're going to search. There's not a lot you could do. But after the fact, you and your attorney could argue whether or not that was proper. Same at work. If the public can access a public place, so can ICE. So like a restaurant where people are being served, ICE can be in there, police can be in there, your post person can be in there. But like you and me, they can't go into the back. They can't start wandering around the kitchen. They can't go back to the office. All those places are marked private. And that's true with schools. That's true with work. Our advice to those places is to make clear what's open to the public and what isn't. Oftentimes, it's pretty obvious at a hospital, for example, you can't just go up to different floors. You can't go back into the emergency room. That's all clearly not open to the public. But to protect the community, we've encouraged places to kind of mark that and declare it either through a policy, or you could even do signs like not open to the public type signs on a office door, for example. Know your rights, basic, don't provide information about your immigration status. I mean, you won't do that if you're exercising your right to remain silent. If you just say, I don't answer questions. Don't lie. If you're remaining silent, you're not going to have an opportunity to lie. Don't give false documents. Don't carry papers, false documents, or documents that may show your alienage. And I don't like using that word, but alienage is like where you might be from, because then that could potentially be used as proof of that you're from another country, and they could potentially start proceedings using that as an anchor. Don't sign any documents before speaking with an attorney. Anybody who asks you about your immigration status, wants you to look at documents for your immigration status, you should only ever do that with your immigration attorney or with your immigration attorney present. I've been an attorney for 20 years, and if somebody started asking me about my immigration status, I would not say anything unless I had my own immigration attorney with me. Nobody's going to talk your way out of being arrested. If an ICE officer or a police officer has probable cause, if they believe they have enough to arrest you, you're going to be arrested. The best you could do for yourself is assert your rights. Because if you assert your rights and then they violate them, you and your attorney could go back into court later and potentially have a lot of that evidence excluded. They could file in both immigration court and criminal justice court. You could file a suppression motion and have some of that evidence excluded. So don't get yourself beat up. People are dangerous. Assert your rights, and what happens. The legal fight isn't going to happen right there in front of the officer. It happens later on in court. Don't let yourself be tricked. Don't sign away documents. We've had people that speak other languages sign documents in English that waive their rights. And that end up in the deportation pipeline. Don't let that be you. I want to note this RAISE hotline. So this is the Florida Rapid Response Alliance for Immigrant Safety and Empowerment. And it includes a lot of the folks on this call. FLIC, for example, where Tiffany works, ACLU of Florida, where Kara works, Americans for Immigrant Justice, and a bunch of other organizations. FLIC, ACLU, Catholic Legal Services, and it's intended to be a hotline for people to call to report ICE activity. If there's a report of ICE activity, we'll send a legal observer to document what's happening and then report back to the Alliance for the Alliance to determine whether or not this is something that we ought to report out. More often than not, it's not worth to report these things out because there's a lot of misinformation, and spreading that kind of fear is actually part of the plan. So we don't want to unnecessarily spread fear. The mantra being spread power, not panic. But we do want to get legal observers on the scene, including if they just meet with people, to be able to help people connect with attorneys, help people figure out where their loved one is being held. And then maybe sign them up for Know Your Rights presentations, sign them up for family protection clinics, maybe immigration clinics. Help them kind of reconnect with the person that was grabbed or the people. I think I don't have a lot of time left, but I will mention quickly a family plan. FLIC has regular family protection clinics where they can actually help you fill out your family protection plan. So that means, like in the worst case scenario, the awful scenario where somebody in your family ends up being placed in the detention and the deportation pipeline, what are you going to do? Who's going to pick up the kids? who's going to pay the mortgage, who's going to pay the rent, who has information for the bank accounts, who has the attorney's number, where is mom's A-file immigration papers located. All that stuff you could put together in a nice packet, and these clinics will help folks do that. Make sure that you have copies and access to all of your proof of identity documents, all of your immigration paperwork, proof of physical presence. I think Tiffany mentioned this earlier, but now there's, through an executive order, there's an extension of expedited removal. It used to be if you were in the country for less than 14 days or within 100 miles, that they could do expedited removal, which means you really don't get much of an opportunity or any at all in court. So that's been extended to 2 years. So now we're recommending people to make sure that you have proof of physical presence for at least 2 years. And there are some examples there of how you might be able to do that. A utility bill, mortgage bill, your car registration. You've opened up a bank account 5 years ago and it shows activity, that type of thing. Proof of good moral character is good to start to collect. That might be important to your immigration case if that happens. And then legal power documents. At those family protection clinics, we have volunteer trust and estates attorneys that can help people think through what type of guardianship document makes sense for them, or what type of power attorney makes sense for them, and to make sure that it's actually filled out correctly and that it's going to be useful to them. Other documents for the list that's in there, and there's a checklist on the family protection plan that has all these things on the checklist. Make sure you know where your emergency contacts are, your insurance cards, all those types of things. All the really important documents to your life. Make sure you have copies of that, and they're all accessible to somebody, not just the person that might be detained. And your emergency plan, make sure that your family members and workers know what to do. Like I said earlier, don't fight back. Remain calm, don't run. If you are approached by an ICE officer or somebody, there's probably 4 things you could say. I mentioned the ones earlier. I don't answer questions. I'd like to speak to an attorney. I don't consent to searches. And then the last one is, am I free to go? So if an officer approaches you, that could just be a consensual conversation. And ICE officers, police officers always assert, I wasn't attempting to detain this person or arrest this person. We were just having a conversation. But most people feel like they can't go anywhere. So you can always ask, am I free to go? If the ICE officer says yes, just slowly walk away. If they say no, well, then you know you're detained. You're detained and you might be arrested. If you're detained, you could say, well, I don't answer questions and I'd like to speak to an attorney. Keep this, I just passed the hotline number, but the hotline number on the previous page is important. That's the RAISE hotline and the FLIC hotline number. And you can actually download a copy of a family preparedness plan at this QR code. It's a lot of the basic stuff, but if you want to get more help figuring out, filling it out, talking to an attorney, you could sign up for one of the FLIC family preparedness clinics. And I will leave it at that. If I can.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was such critical information for all of us to have. I know it might have been a lot to digest, but this information is available to you. Hopeful that you all gain access to it. Hoping that you'll all record the RAISE hotline. That is definitely something that you should share with your community. Now, I know that most of us have connections to people in schools, in K-12, in our colleges, in our universities, and there is a lot of turmoil happening in that arena with the deportations, with the raids, with just the fear of what may or may not happen. So I want to turn the mic over to people who have been deep into the policy of following what's happening and making great advances in that category. So let's first discuss our K-12 policies with our younger students in a classroom and at a school setting. So Kathy Bohm, can you apprise us of that policy, what's happening, and what we may be able to do?
So thank you so much, Pamela, and all of you that are on the call. I know we all care very deeply about our community and especially our immigrant families. So just so you understand, we have 3.2 million children in our school system. And the estimate for our children who are undocumented are 49,000. That's 1.5% of all the children in our schools. We'd like to think that schools are, safe places, and safe places, kind of, that term has gotten a bad name, but we want it to be a place where we are teaching and learning and not having to worry about what happens to our children, what happens to their families, and what happens to our staff. There are 3 pieces of law that we depend on, that we used to depend on greatly, and now everything is so uncertain. So there is a Supreme Court case called Plyer v. Doe, which says that education is so very important for everybody in this country that schools are not permitted to ask the status of families, whether they are documented or undocumented. So a school can ask for proof of birth certificate, so proof of age, and a school can ask for proof of residency to establish that a child belongs in the school, but they are not allowed to ask about immigrant status. And we shouldn't be asking that either. So if we are connected to school systems, we should not be having those conversations with children or our families or even the staff that we work with. A second protection is the Family Education's Right and Privacy Act. We hear a lot about HIPAA. Well, this is FERPA, and FERPA says that student information is protected unless the parents consent to its release. And that includes immigration officials. So they can't come into the school and demand to see a list with all the contact information for our students. There are very specific protections that are in law. And then the third piece, of course, that Paul and Tiffany both have talked about is the Fourth Amendment right to unreasonable search and seizure. So a law enforcement official can't just walk into the office in a school and demand to have contact information from a school district. So that's protected. Now, our concern is that there may be places where individuals in a school may choose to believe that cooperation means turning everything they have access to over to law enforcement or ICE or anybody else who shows up and asks for it. So school districts all have policies that govern what law enforcement can and can't do in relations to access to children, access to the buildings, and access to the information about families. In Palm Beach, there are 4 different school district policies. One of them's 20 pages long, another one's 6 pages long, that all have regulations and procedures for what a principal should do if law enforcement of any kind comes to a school and asks for information or asks for a child. We recommend, and thank you, Judge Holmes has put the reference to the case in the chat for those of you that want to see it. So when officials show up at the school, there are procedures that principals are supposed to follow. Palm Beach actually has very strong, very clear process and procedures for what should happen. I'm not familiar with Indian River. I am familiar with some other districts who are taking a lot of liberties with FERPA and all of the other court cases. And so we are very concerned that as citizens, we monitor the school board meetings to see what they're doing with those policies and ensure that children are protected, the privacy of children are protected, and that access to children's information and their families' information is protected. School districts will also have policies for if a parent is unavailable. One of the things that we are very concerned about is the potential for a parent being detained and no one knowing that the parent has been detained. And I say that because in Miami-Dade, you guys probably have read the headline, and I want to talk about that. I have permission to disclose just a little bit of information about that one. So that teacher, there was a teacher who was detained and deported. They were a teacher in Miami-Dade. They had legal status. We don't know why they were deported, but the school was not, and it did happen before January 20th, so it's not a result of the executive order. The school did not know what happened. The teacher just didn't come to work. And the school district had to ask law enforcement for a wellness check because nobody notified the school that anything had happened to this teacher. They just didn't come to work the next day and the next day and the next day. The same thing is what we're concerned about for children. So if you have children that are undocumented in families and an adult is detained, or if it's a mixed family where some have citizenship and some family members do not, we may have children left at school, and we're very concerned that the school district have appropriate policies and information to make sure that those children don't just get put into foster care without someone taking care of and attending to their needs and their responsibilities. In our school district, we also have staff. Now, because the school districts are so large, they will have already been participating in that e-verify process, but there are quite a number of teachers in Florida that are here under a J-1 visa. So they were actually brought from another country and hired to teach kids. What we don't know is if those folks that we've hired to teach our children are also going to be caught up in some of this immigration madness. I don't know how else to describe it because it just feels really wrong and really out of control. We do not yet have any evidence that there have been ICE raids inside public schools in Florida or private schools in Florida. If we find out that that is happening, then of course we will need to assist with whatever information districts need and teachers need, faculty need to be able to address that. We do have recommendations for staff, and if you have questions about that, I'll be happy to provide that. I'm not sure that that's really useful for us in this setting. The only other thing is that engaging in political speech on campus, we have to remind all of our staff that they are subject to the laws of the state and the policies of the school district. And so you don't lose your rights to political activism, but during work, you pretty much do. You pretty much should not be engaging in political activities and speech. Outside of school day, you haven't lost your First Amendment rights, but there are special circumstances for teachers because they are professionals, because they're associated with school districts. And so you just have to be really, really careful. We want everybody to be safe. We want our children to be in school every day. We want our teachers to be in school every day. And I think together is the only way that we're going to solve all of this. So that's all I have tonight.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was very detailed, very ominous information. It's still a bit unsettling to all of us. I know that ACLU has a very good habit of sometimes refining policies and refining information that is helpful to parents, and they have done so with the letter to school districts. So Kara, can you talk to us a bit about this letter? Tell us whether it has been issued to all of our public school districts or private school districts, and a little bit about how this can be used.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you all for having me here and for convening us all together. And thank you, Pamela, for inviting us all. So this is a perfect segue from what Kathy was saying, but, we are hearing from school districts and parents and students in school, and, people are concerned about what is going to happen, particularly now that they have rolled back the protections for sensitive locations, including schools. And so because of that concern that there's going to be possibly more immigration activity at schools, we wanted to make sure that school districts had guidance on what their rights and responsibilities are. So what constitutional protections are afforded to students and teachers and to the school itself, and what their responsibilities are as well as their rights. So it sort of is, it covers both of those things in this letter that we're issuing to superintendents, all superintendents throughout the state. I believe the letter is going to go out tomorrow, and once it is issued, we will make sure that it can get sent to everybody here, just so everybody can have that as well, because it would be useful for everyone's own school district. It's really meant to be guidance for schools on what they need to know in order to best protect themselves, in order to ensure that their students have a safe learning environment. There's a lot of confusion and a lot of fear, and the laws that have been passed and the executive orders, all of that has created a lot of confusion because they're not very clear, and sometimes they contradict each other. Sometimes they contradict constitutional protections. So because of all of that, we wanted to make sure that schools feel armed with the best information to be able to provide a safe environment for their students. The letter kind of goes through pretty much what Kathy had talked about, the Supreme Court cases that talk about the right for students, regardless of immigration status, to be able to obtain a safe and secure education. It talks about the constitutional rights, the rights of making sure that a judicial warrant is present, and so making sure that schools understand that they need to have a valid judicial warrant if they're going to open up their, that they're not required to have people come into their private spaces of their school without a judicial warrant, and making sure that schools understand the difference between what a valid judicial warrant is and what, as Paul was saying earlier, administrative warrant, and making sure that they can recognize those differences as well. In addition, it also talks about the privacy issues that Kathy talked about with FERPA, and making sure that no information about students is unlawfully shared with anybody that it shouldn't be shared with, and to make sure that that information isn't being collected as well, because there's only certain things that schools need to collect about their students, and Kathy went over those in terms of the age of the student, their school records, their grades, whether they're a resident, but they shouldn't be collecting immigration status. And to the extent that any schools have that information, making sure that that they aren't collecting that information. So accompanying the letter that we're sending out, there's also a best practices sort of guidelines that we're sending as well. So one is sort of a letter explaining what the rights and responsibilities are, and the other is more of a guidance document of best practices. And some of the things that we go over in there are, what to do right now before ICE shows up at your door. What are the things that you can do to protect yourself in case they do? Hopefully that won't happen. Hopefully we won't see this happening in schools, but making sure that the best protections are in place just in case. Some of that guidance, and I'll make sure that once this goes out tomorrow, we'll make sure everybody here has it as well. But the guidance is pretty, it's pretty straightforward, making sure that there's a designated liaison or person that's designated to do the interactions if ICE show up. So we really just want one person to be able to interact. We don't want anybody who happens to be in the front office at that time to start taking requests, right? We want to make sure that it's the principal or the vice principal, but somebody who is designated just to keep, just to make sure that that line of communication is really just resting with one individual, and that there's not, different entryways or points of entry. Another guideline is making sure that whenever anybody shows up, and if they present a warrant, making sure that copies of that are sent to the district attorney, and so that the district attorney is able to review that information, because we don't expect schools and principals to be able to, determine whether or not it's a judicial warrant or administrative warrant. We want to educate them so that they know that there's a difference and they know what to look out for. But making sure that copies of those are made and that they're sent to the district attorney to review is part of this guidelines. And there's a bunch of other things in there as well with regard to privacy and best practices. But I'll make sure that everybody has that. And I think Paul put in the chat that there's also guidance in the Raise app for folks to, if you haven't downloaded that already, there's a lot of good materials in there too. And I'll make sure to put some links in here as well with other guidance as well. So that should go out tomorrow, and then we'll make sure that everybody gets it. It's going to go out to all of the superintendents throughout the state, and also to the district attorneys possibly.
Well, thank you, Kara, and it's good to know that the letter will be sent directly to district school administrators. I think that's important, and hopefully they'll be sharing that information with principals of schools. But we do want to make sure Dr. Holness will get a copy of this as soon as possible tomorrow. And I think it's a good document for parents to also have at hand. So, Madam President, we'll make sure you have this tomorrow, because I'm certain that you'll get some inquiries about it. And of course, as you and Paul have indicated, it will also be available on the Raise website. So thank you. It's not just our K-12 students that we are concerned about. We have many students in our colleges and universities. Those locales seem to be more open, what I would say more inviting for ICE and federal officials to appear at. So Alexis, are there policies that offer some level of protection to our higher ed students, and what is it that they should know?
Yeah, thanks so much, Pamela. I would echo everything that everybody has said thus far. Thankfully, those students at our colleges and universities here in the state of Florida are covered by a lot of these same rights and laws that protect our students in our K-12 institutions. But as you pointed out, it's a lot different on a higher ed campus. Most of Florida's colleges and universities are open campuses. You don't have to have a reason to be on Florida State's campus to walk around and look at things. You don't have to have a reason to have or to be on FIU's campus. You can freely walk, and that the same could be said for our colleges. So I think one thing that I would echo that Paul said for our students in our colleges and universities and their families is to know what's considered a public space and what's considered a private space, because that's very important. Our dormitories on campus are considered private spaces. So they would have the same rights as if they were in a private apartment or their homes back home. So there are a lot of rights, and it's super important to know your rights, but to also know what your school's policies are. They do still, like Kathy said, at the K-12 level, and Kara kind of mentioned it, there is somebody who's going to be in charge of these policies and finding these things. Luckily, unless ICE is going to be, I use Florida State because I went there, unless they're going to be standing in Landis screens screaming out your name, it's not very simple to find somebody on a college and university campus. So they would have to go through the administrative processes that are in place, and each university and each college should have a policy in place for how they handle these things. And similarly to our K-12, they can't just hand out information because our college and university students are covered by FERPA. The one distinction I would make is that those students who are here under an exchange program or with one of the visas that would allow them to study here, because of the way that the law works, there is different information that's available for those students who are here on an exchange program or who are here studying on one of our campuses. So, but they still do have protections. They're just a little bit different. I would also echo what Kathy said about our professors who are here on with their work visas as well. Again, most of that information is protected, but there are different rules that they have to follow, that the university has to provide documentation to prove that they are here working legally. I think the one thing I would be remiss to not discuss while we're on this call, and I don't believe Tiffany touched it at all, was the fact that now the 6,000 or so students in Florida who were receiving out-of-state fee waivers under the DACA program will no longer be eligible for that out-of-state fee waiver. During their testimony and their discussion, most of the legislators who were promoting this without a glide path for students said that it would be a cost savings to the state, when in fact the Florida Policy Institute has done research and looked at it, and it could potentially be up to a $15 million loss to the state's revenue, because when these students can no longer afford to get to school and to pay those tuition rates, they're not going to just take out student loans. Many of them are not eligible to take out student loans. And so these students who are here and through no choice of their own have now lost that ability to be a part of a great institutions that we have here in Florida for higher education. So much like our K-12 friends, there is a lot there. It's important to know your rights. It's important to know what your school's policies are. And the same goes for the staff. Know what you need to do and know how this works. And just remember, like Kara said, it's all going to fall back on the administration. So you need to make sure that you know what to do if they come knocking on your door of your lecture hall, because again, a lecture hall is considered a private space. And so There's a lot to consider, there's a lot to know, and it's probably just a little bit more complex than what we see on the K-12 side. So just know your rights, know what's going on, and understand those policies so that you can be the best advocate for your students and for yourselves. I'll hand it back to you, Pamela.
Thank you, Alexis, for that information. And we're getting a lot of good information being placed in the chat. So if you can gain access to that, I think at the end of the day, this presentation, you'll be well prepared to continue to discuss this in the community. Now, as I mentioned at the outset, we just had 3, I think, special sessions in a matter of 2 weeks. Special session A, special session B, and special session C. Special session B produced an immigration bill that today was received and vetoed by the governor. Special session C produced a similar bill with some exceptions, but nevertheless, it was policy that none of us enjoyed seeing happen, and we won't enjoy it being implemented in the state of Florida. I will say I've been involved in so many sessions and so many special sessions, but this one was personal and it was emotional because we were dealing with our own peers and our own colleagues who are from these families. And so we take them as being a part of us. And we suffered and persevered through this process as they did, because we always want them to know we stand with them as well. So, Kara, can you give us a synopsis of what this new legislation will entail? As I recall, the bill became law when the governor signed it, and the governor signed it about 5 minutes after the legislature passed it. So he was definitely in a hurry to put these policies in place, and activity in Florida has already ramped up. So just give us an overview of the legislation known as Senate Bill 2C.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pamela. And as Pamela said, special session, there was 3 different special sessions. Special session A was the governor's, huge package that he put out originally of what he wanted to do. It was over 70 pages, and that was sort of his idea for how to do the most cruel and inhumane approach to immigration in Florida. And then there was a special session B, which was the legislators, the leaders in the legislature, really running that show, where they had their own competing package that basically, instead of having the power rest with the governor, it had, many of the same horrific provisions in it, but had the power rest with the agricultural commissioner. And then in special session C, they all compromised and came up with a sort of joint package where still maintaining so many of these horrific provisions, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the important thing to sort of understand is that even though there were different competing bills, they all had the same purpose, and it was to support Trump's mass deportation agenda and to cause the most harm and instability in Florida. There's no humane, there's no effort to exercise any humanity in these bills. And so I just wanted to kind of set that setting first. The bills that ultimately passed in special session C, there were 3 different bills. There was, I'll start with 2C. 2C was sort of the package bill, which had most of the provisions in it. It was over 50 pages. And that's the bill that we've heard a bunch about already today, but had the repeal of the in-state tuition. You know, as we just talked about, you know, this was a piece that seemed to be just designed to be cruel. There would be a savings to the state based on the Florida Policy Institute's analysis if in-state tuition were to be kept in place, because people who are currently paying in-state tuition would not be able to afford college otherwise. And so this made it so they were able to pay tuition to go to school. And if they don't have in-state tuition, they're not able to pay. So it is a loss. You know, there's so many things that are troubling about that, but, you know, one thing I just wanted to mention was, you know, the bill specifically says, you know, it repeals it. And the only people that are allowed to have in-state tuition are citizens of the United States, you know, or those who are lawfully present in the United States. And something I want to mention about that is, you know, we are just seeing today about the announcement about TPS and being removed. We've seen, you know, so the what is lawfully present continues to be sort of can be whittled away over and over. So that's something I wanted to highlight here. It's going to force all the students that are currently there to be reevaluated in July. And so students that, you know, might be in their third or fourth year of school, they will lose their opportunity to pay in-state tuition after that. So it basically is making it so students who are close to getting their degree cannot finish it. The main thing that this bill does is a very large thing. It takes $300 million of our state taxpayer resources and diverts it away from state needs, from things that Floridians actually care about and lay awake at night thinking about. Needs, you know, resources that could go to putting food on your table, that could go to affordable housing. It takes that $300 million and gives it to support Trump's mass deportation agenda. This is, you know, there's no reason why our state should be taking away our dollars and utilizing it towards federal immigration. I mean, we already pay federal taxes. The federal government already has our money. It's already using our money for this purpose. And now we're taking state resources to do that. And it's $300 million. It creates a state board of immigration enforcement that will sort of oversee this mechanism. And it allows for hiring of more law enforcement. It allows for training of law enforcement. It basically is giving the money over to be able to have this machine be able to run and to be able to have maximum participation in this agenda. In addition to some of those things, it has other provisions that didn't get as much of attention, but are also incredibly damaging. It creates a third-degree felony for voting while not a citizen. You know, it is already illegal to vote if you're not a citizen. There's no reason to be able to do this, to be able to make it a third-degree felony. And it makes it so that someone's ignorance or not knowing their legal status is not a defense to that third-degree felony. It creates a third-degree felony for aiding or soliciting someone else who is not a US citizen to vote. It is very hard for people to know when they are trying to get people to register and get people to vote and doing outreach efforts, whether somebody is a US citizen or not? That is not a question that you ask. You say, oh, what issues do you care about? It makes it very dangerous to have such language in there that is hard to abide by and hard to know how to conduct yourself in voter outreach efforts. It reclassifies sentences for undocumented citizens when they commit a crime. And when I say commit a crime, I mean this could be a misdemeanor. So if somebody commits a misdemeanor, if it's a first-degree misdemeanor, normally that would be up to 1 year in jail. And this says that if you are a undocumented person committing the same first-degree misdemeanor, it automatically becomes a third-degree felony. So it automatically becomes a up to 5 years in prison sentence just because of your undocumented status. It makes it so it is more difficult for undocumented immigrants to be able to pay bail, make bail, when, under our current system, you are innocent until proven guilty. If you are arrested, you are just arrested for something. And then you are able to make your, the judge will take into consideration whether or not you're a flight risk and a bunch of other factors. And often you are able to pay a bail amount and go home. And you can await the trial date. You're allowed to get an attorney. You're allowed to go home to your kids. This makes it so that the judge can take into consideration your immigration status when they're making those determinations. There are several other provisions in it, but those are just some of the highlights. I know I want to make sure that we have time to discuss 4C as well.
Thank you, Kara. There's nothing good in that measure. There's nothing positive in that measure, and we are still skating downhill. So how do we talk about this issue? There are immigrants in our community that are desperate for information. Sometimes they don't know who to go to. We don't know what to say to them. And how do we address this issue in our community? There are people who go to work every day, they rush home, they want to feed their kids, they want to get the homework done. They don't know what's happening. But we do have to keep people informed in an effort to keep them out of harm's way. What kind of language do we use? How do we talk and not offend our immigrants in our community? So Nadeska, shape this for us and give us some pointers on how we pass on this information and how we communicate to our community.
Thank you so much, Pamela, and thank you for inviting me to be here tonight. And this group of panelists is amazing, so much valuable information. And also, just to be clear, I'm going to be sharing some tools that we can use to communicate, not necessarily specifically to the immigrants that are being impacted by this, but more to the general public to make sure that we're shifting public perception in a way that's going to help our people stay safe and help our children stay in schools. My name is Nadeska. I run communications for Florida for All. In case anyone isn't familiar, Florida for All is a coalition, an alignment vehicle made up of 6 organizations at the state level, including our friends at the Florida Immigrant Coalition. So I want to give a huge shout out to Flick's communications director, Adriana, who couldn't be here tonight, but helped prepare a lot of the content that I'm going to share with you. And as I mentioned, I want to make sure to give you the tools that we need in order to bring more people into our vision, build narrative power, and win when it comes to immigration and immigration policies. So we are going to pivot a little bit and talk about how we should talk about all the information that we're getting tonight in order to shift public perception and keep our people safe and keep our kids in school. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Before I really dive in, I want to take a moment to name that I think we are in a moment where everyone can viscerally feel that our economic and our political system is broken, right? Like things are expensive, rent and insurance are going up. There's a lot of instability and there's a lot of fear. And when humans have all these unmet emotional needs like security and control, they're left vulnerable, not just physically, but mentally, right? To all this misinformation and dangerous lies from our opposition. And I always think of this one example now. Last year, when we were in between hurricanes, we had just had Hurricane Helene. Is right before Hurricane Milton. And I remember there was a moment on the Breakfast Club where a man from Tampa called in and he named that he was really scared and he was really angry and he was blaming immigrants for taking away resources and making him feel unsafe. And I just remember thinking like, wow, his feelings are totally valid, right? Because we live in a state where our governor and extreme lawmakers are not taking disaster preparedness seriously, and they don't care about what happens to everyday people, like with everything that we just talked about tonight, with all these policies that they're passing with no disregard for human well-being, right? And it's those same leaders that take advantage of moments of fear and chaos in order to spread lies, to divide us and distract us so that we falsely start blaming each other instead of rightfully blaming the leaders that got us into the situation to begin with, right? So I just kind of wanted to name that's the landscape that we're in. And so I hope that one of the take-home messages of tonight is that if we don't proactively actually name the villain and the real issues surrounding everything with the billionaires and the corporate elite that are actually benefiting from these harmful policies, right? And the Republicans that they're funding, then they're going to keep spreading the lie that immigrants and trans people are the enemy, and the lie is going to work. So very important that we have a proactive message that really inoculates our people against our opposition. So everything that I'm sharing tonight is going to be from this amazing resource, The Ultimate Messaging Guide to Winning the Immigration Narrative. I want you to know that it was made using over 100 pieces of original research, contributed by over 60 organizations across the country, with things including polling, focus groups, so many other modes, all of which was brought together to create this beautiful picture about what we know about the mindset on immigration and how we can successfully message in a way that brings that audience towards support. So instead of just going ahead and giving you the word for word messaging, like I said, I want to give you the tools that you need in order to bring people in from the center, who research shows can be supportive of immigration issues, but might be emotionally blocked by certain fears and concerns and misunderstandings. And that audience includes many Black, Brown, and immigrant communities. And just to be clear about when we're talking about narrative and making sure we're on the same page, when I say narrative, I'm talking about the fact that all the stories that we choose to tell and how we tell them, they're like the tiles of a mosaic that build up to create an entire worldview. So the narratives are the things that we believe to be true based on the stories that we're told, and they tend to be shared by a group of people with a common identity, and it's reinforced over time. So if we want to fight dangerous policies and pass pro-immigrant policy during legislative session, one narrative that we really need people to believe is that Floridians who are immigrants contribute to our communities in many different ways, right? But the opposing narrative that we're fighting is that immigrants are taking away jobs and taking away resources. So we have to be very cognizant of what that opposing narrative is. And in order to bring a narrative to life, there's all these different pieces that need to be strategically reinforcing one another, and something that we call a narrative pyramid. I won't get too deep into it, but just to give you like a quick example, I thought I could use the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of the messages that we were hearing was Black Lives Matter, hashtag BLM. The stories that we were hearing were those of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin. The narratives that we were hearing, the things that we wanted people to believe to be true, was that all people, no matter what they look like, deserve the freedom to breathe. There was also, we keep us safe, was a very prominent narrative. And then the deep narratives, kind of the values that was underpinning all of that, were things like freedom, safety, equal opportunity. So I did want to take a moment to mention this because there's all these different pieces that have to be working together and reinforcing each other in order to have a winning narrative that's going to shape worldviews and help us win long-term power. And one of the ways that we do that is through legislation and governing. So our job is really to push those proactive narratives that serve our vision of the world, where all working people of all races, places, and backgrounds are standing united to get what's ours. And that is what's going to break down and intervene on those dangerous myths and misunderstandings that are, as I mentioned, intentionally spread by our opposition because they stoke fear and anger and all these big emotions that inhibit empathy and our ability to kind of like reach out and support one another. So one of the topics I did want to touch on tonight is this framework of human beings being hardwired. I won't go too deep into it, but I think it's helpful that this framework identifies 5 key factors: emotions, identity, beliefs, values, and lived experiences, and how these work together to inform how people make decisions, behave, and maybe even change their behaviors over time. So once we map these out, we can kind of more easily identify where are the barriers and where are the windows of opportunity where we might be able to reach someone or a specific audience. So for example, I always find identity to be a very powerful window, using language like as a fellow Floridian, as a fellow mother, as someone that knows what it means to work hard and provide for our family. Let me talk to you about our children's freedom to learn and the importance of in-state tuition, making sure we're leading with that thing that connects us to the other person before getting to that key message. Because when it comes to having an effective message, the last theoretical piece I wanted to touch on is that humans all have an upstairs brain and a downstairs brain. The upstairs brain tends to be the more sophisticated part of our brain. It allows us to plan and be thoughtful and be reflective and have empathy towards others. But our downstairs brain is the older part of our brain and deals more with reactions, impulses, survival instincts, strong emotions. And when our downstairs brain is triggered, it basically shuts down access to the upstairs brain and our better selves. So anything that's perceived to be political or polarizing is going to trigger a lot of that downstairs brain. And this is, of course, very important to think about when we are dealing with a topic like immigration that has become so highly politicized. And I want to be clear that our opposition knows very well that this is how the brain works, and they use that very effectively to their advantage, right? They only have to take one step. All they have to do is trigger fear or any other big downstairs brain emotion, and that's automatically going to block people from feeling empathy. So we have to work a little bit harder. There's a 2-step process. We have to make sure that the downstairs brain is calm and create that window of opportunity for people to be receptive to our message. Because I know sometimes it comes from a very good place, but I think our side, because we're so passionate, sometimes we kind of like to lead with the pieces that people will not be very receptive to. So just being very cognizant of the way that we speak to other people and the way we structure our message is going to help us build long-term power and do what we need to do to win. So based on all this research, there's a general message framing that we recommend using across issues. We call it the value, villain, victory, vision. It's 4 V's. So we always want to lead with our values. That's what's going to open up that window of opportunity, things like freedom, family, hard work, and naming that they're shared across all races, all classes, all backgrounds. Like I mentioned, we want to make sure to name the villain, the true villain, and point out that they're scapegoating certain people for a reason so that they can benefit. We want to make sure to name a victory to show that we have achieved victory in the past, like with in-state tuition, Rick Scott signed it in 2014. We've done it before, we can do it again. And then close with the vision, making sure that we're bringing people into a brighter future where everyone belongs and everyone has a place. So just to give you one example of like a full pro-immigrant message, starting with the value, whether we were born here or made Florida home, we all contribute to our communities and would do anything to provide a good life for our family and loved ones. Notice it doesn't say immigrant once. So the window is still open. But billionaires and extreme politicians, their funding want to seize even more money and control by attacking our neighbors, tearing families apart, and denying our children's freedom to learn, all while making everyday people pay for it. They spread fear based on what we look like or where we come from so they can distract us, divide us, and stuff their own pockets with the wealth our work creates. This would also be an amazing point to mention what Tiffany pointed out about the $350 billion in federal dollars that they're wasting on political games instead of funding the services that we actually need. I think Kara also mentioned there's another 300 million in state funding they want to throw to political games instead of funding the actual services we need, right? Like healthcare, housing, infrastructure. And if we've learned anything is that people really care about money. So we definitely want to push that point. And then take people to the victory. This is why Floridians across races, places, and backgrounds are standing united to keep our families whole, make our communities thrive, and build a state where all working people have the opportunities and tools to build a good life. The vision. Protecting our public safety and shared prosperity means addressing tax fairness, wage theft, and corporate price gouging, not scapegoating and punishing the hardworking Floridians who are driving our economy while paying more for less and less. When workers across race, background, and immigration status unite to make billionaires and corporations pay what they owe, every Floridian benefits. So really calling out the BS, calling out who the true villains are, and bringing people into our vision of the world where we can all thrive. I know we're at time, so I did want to mention that we're finalizing a legislative session messaging cheat sheet with more of those full narratives built out based for the specific policies that are moving. We also have plenty of embrace and replace cheat sheets for specific language that's humanizing and helps us build an effective narrative. We also have some immigration message testing about to get into the field from our friends on Florida Watch. So everything that comes out of this, I can make sure that everyone on this call gets those resources. And I will stop there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Nadeska. And I'm going to keep you on speed dial because my lower brain has definitely been attacking my upper brain. And I've been blowing a gasket a lot more frequently than I have in the past. So that brings us to the conclusion of the presentation that we wanted to provide to this audience this evening. I know it was a lot. I hope it was beneficial to you. And I'm going to turn the mic back to Madam President. There may be some questions in the chat. I know it is late, but if there's something that we can answer quickly, we'd like to go ahead and do that. So many of us here have also promised to provide additional information. Madam President, I'll make sure you have that available to you because I'm fairly certain you're going to get some questions. But I'm going to turn the mic back over. We're happy to answer some questions before we conclude here this evening.
Right. Very quickly, I wanted to hear from two things. Number one, we've also, in addition to Broward County, we also have Miami-Dade County folk on here. We have Polk County, home of Grady Judd, Indian River County, and our capital city branch of Tallahassee. So we will put this on all of our social media pages. We'll share it out to any of our sister branches who want to review the information as well. I see some people from watching from our social media in different parts of the country. So there's information that certainly that we need. I wanted to go very quickly to Dr. Holness, the school piece, and it talks about the memo that's going out. I know that I'm getting you cold. I know you haven't seen it, but I know that some directions had gone out from our superintendent, Dr. Hepburn. But if you could give us 1 minute on thoughts on how you should go with the school, and also that piece about our state attorney. Is that something that you all, and I know you're going to talk to your general counsel, but I thought that struck me because it's something that we can do. I know that you all have an agreement, the district does, with the state attorney's office, and so give us 1 minute on that piece of it, if you would.
Okay, thank you, Madam President Ellison, and thank you to everyone. It's been very informative. Thank you, Pamela. Such depth of information that we certainly need. And I'm looking forward to that letter as well that is forthcoming for the superintendent. I think that will help to provide some guidance to us. So I'd just like to mention, Madam President and the rest of us here, that Broward County Schools, we sent out the superintendent rather sent out a letter to all of our school leadership or principals to inform them of how to proceed, and to also just remind them of what Kathy mentioned earlier, FERPA, that students' records are protected. and that unless there's an authorized individual seeking information, that those records are protected under FERPA guidelines. Also, the superintendent provided some guidance to our leadership staff that should there be any questions, to contact our general counsel if they're unsure of what actions to take or before they take any kind of action. Madam President, in Broward County as well, in 2017, we had what we called an immigrant support plan. The district is looking to revise that plan and to provide more added information as it pertains to the challenges our students are facing and our families with new immigration process and policies that are now in place. And lastly, we do have a resource guide for our immigrant students that has a lot of information that we provide to parents and to students. And Madam President Ellison, I also sent that to your email recently, so you can take a look at that as well. But we are certainly having to deal with the challenges of our families and our students having a significant degree of anxiety and concern because of what's happening. We are trying to respond in the best way we can as school board members and as a district to alleviate some of those concerns and also to stay within the guidelines of what the law requires. So it's a careful navigating of the current times that we're in. It's very concerning to all of us and sometimes very stressing for our students and our staff. But we are on top of the concerns the best way we can, and we look forward to anything that comes out of Tallahassee that can help us. We also work, Madam President, as you know, I work closely with Senator Osgood and others from the state legislature to understand how we as a district can proceed in the guidelines of the law as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's certainly very helpful. She has been sharing, that information about FERPA, and for anybody that will listen, and to those that don't want to listen as well. Want to make sure. I think that I know Judge Holmes was going with the questions as well, and our own Commissioner Carlene Maxwell Williams has been doing citizenship drives, providing information. And Commissioner, let me see if she's still on. I know that she works with a number of immigration attorneys here in Broward that are constantly, scheduling workshops, doing works, that sort of thing. Commissioner, I did give her to talk. That's there. Does anyone see any of the other questions while we're waiting for her? I want to thank. Yes, go right ahead. And our president from their Tallahassee branch, our President Marcelin. I know that we will be because you're in the capital city, we will certainly be calling upon you, President Marcelin. To put that law degree to work. I think he's just coming over.
Hello.
Okay, go right ahead. Very quickly. We were talking about the citizenship workshops that you have, and I think you are a conduit for information on immigration attorneys as well.
Yes, so my name is Carlene Maxwell Williams, and I am the Commissioner for the City of Lauderdale Lakes and the Lead Citizenship Coordinator for Florida Immigrant Coalition. I'm also a Department of Justice accredited rep, meaning I'm like an immigration attorney. I just don't charge for my services. So I have been doing my work that I think is important is getting the legal permanent residents together that they can become citizens. So I've been doing workshops throughout the state of Florida, Broward County, Dade, Palm Beach, Orlando, Jacksonville, anywhere that I'm needed in the community. We come together with volunteers from the university high schools. I partner with Jamaican Bar Association, all the association, HLA, Hispanic Bar, and we all come together. They usually is on a Saturday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And we advertise, promote it, and help the legal permanent. Last Saturday, I did one in North Lauderdale. We had 100 people that came in and signed up for the program. We helped about 80 of them and referred. We have another big drive coming up this Saturday in Lauderdale Lakes. We have almost 100 people registered for that event also. We're also going to be doing TPS. The TPS is going to be in person, hybrid. So if they are not comfortable coming out in person, they can just sign up on the Zoom link and we're willing to help them. I'm also doing the citizenship drive virtually also because I know a lot of people may not be comfortable coming out. So starting March 8th, I will be doing a virtual component of that at least once every month. So that's it. And I'm always
Okay,
looking for
Commissioner, we had a
volunteers.
question regarding that. It says there's a TPS clinic this Saturday. What does that mean for Haitians that now expire August 25th? So I got that will be for one of the either ACLU or whoever else would be best to answer that. Pamela? Is it?
I'm going to throw this to Paul to see if he has any comments
Okay,
on that.
thank you. I don't think he is. I think he's still having problems hearing.
I think I just unmuted if you can hear me.
Okay, yes.
We can hear you.
Cool. I don't know about the TPS clinic. I think Carlene probably has more information on it. A lot of those events are also on Flick's website.
Yes, that is a part of Florida Immigrant Coalition also. So we don't know what it's gonna be like. We do have attorneys there that will answer everyone's questions that are concerned. Every Haitian that comes in will have someone there to answer their question because I think that order just came in today. So we don't know what the picture looks like, but we're here to help. As you can see that we have our 1-800 number and we have a lot of pro bono's attorney that are there to help. We have the Haitian Lawyers Association that are on point to help every one of their brothers and sisters from that island. So once they come out, if they have anyone who's listening and they have questions or concern, what it means for them being a TPS representative from Haiti, please come out or join the link and speak to an attorney that's there to answer your questions and concerns.
Thank you.
And I'd second that, Carlene. I think if you do have TPS, and TPS is just that, temporary protected status. It's generally country based and intended to be temporary, but it's normally renewed time and again, including because of the country conditions, but oftentimes is just renewed as a matter of humanitarian values that we hold as a country. But those same humanitarian values are no longer held with the current administration. So it does remove that temporary protected status. And what that means is you are just protected from removal proceedings. So if TPS is gone, then you're exposed again or exposed anew to removal proceedings. It doesn't mean you're going to be tracked down immediately. But the best advice is what I think Carlene just gave, is to go to one of those clinics, talk to an attorney, because the individualized advice I think will be most helpful. Oftentimes somebody will have some sort of pathway to legal permanent resident status or even citizenship and might not quite know about it. So there might be an opportunity to move from TPS to something else. But those are super individualized
Thank you.
scenarios.
Thank you. President Brown?
Yes, I've been dealing with the local school superintendent, and I told him that in this, we should err on the side of our children because they're stressed out and they traumatized, and it's permeating all of the children. If it's one child, it permeates. Talk with our sheriff about these ICE situations, stopping people. Had an employee that works with me whose husband was stopped, simple profiling. And a lot of this information tonight I'm going to garner and disseminate because the Latino community has been reaching out to me, but I like to go somewhere. I think Modeska was it. She said, fear and chaos. That's the pink elephant in the room. And ladies and gentlemen, those of us on here tonight, we must not operate from a position of fear, because there's enough fear out there. And the only way we're gonna destroy this is collectively working together and trusting each other. And Madam President, awesome that you brought all of us together. We have work to do, and I think you have a coalition that's ready to do it.
Thank you. And finally, President Marcellin. I'm not sure if he's in a meeting or not, in a place where he could talk, but he is in our Tallahassee, president of our Tallahassee branch, and is certainly more than willing to get the work done and work with us as well. To our general counsel, I will certainly be reaching out, Judge Holmes, to make sure that we communicate, in particular with our schools, and that we too work with our commissioner to, we have a lot of folk who are saying, does anyone know of recommendations for immigration attorneys? There's still a lot of information that, people are just seeking. I know that I think one of our vice presidents has, their church has a significant Haitian American population who, they had some problems last time. And so we want to make sure that everyone is certainly protected and is able to get the information that we need. I think that is it for the questions. Remember, this video will be up. We will provide all of the links that were mentioned tonight. There were some folk that missed it. And I know that Mr. Kinsey over in Polk County dealing with Sheriff Grady will certainly be calling later on this evening, because he has his hands full on a constant basis. And with that, I think that we've covered, well, I thank everyone for participating. There will be other Know Your Rights, and we will certainly serve as a resource to make sure that, yes, qualified attorneys referral, that is why I said Judge Holmes, because that's what she does. And she scrutinizes anyone that we suggest that we allow to talk to get involved. I know that there are some folk who do charge lots of money and the services that they folk have said they've not received didn't match the money they believe, and over the course of years, so some things have not gone well, but we don't want to add to that as well. That's why I suggested that Judge Holmes be the person who will check out this person, make sure they're qualified, and generally, if they're doing anything worth anything in Broward County, her 20 plus years on the bench will allow her to have some knowledge of them. So anytime that we have spoken, I ask her, do you know this person, this attorney? And she says, no, we're always concerned, not only know them, but know the quality of their work. And I think that is it. Minister Edwards. See, was she able
Good
to
evening, everyone.
Yes,
Let
ma'am.
us go to the throne of grace. Most gracious, eternal God and Father, we thank you for what our eyes have seen and our ears have heard. God, we are grateful on tonight for your word instructs us in all of our getting for us to get understanding. And we are grateful for the expertise that has been shared on tonight. God, we pray now that your people would move forward with faith, with facts, and not with fear. May you bless us in our going out and our coming in. And God, I pray that your spirit would be with us as we dismiss ourselves from this sacred space, but never from your presence. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.
God bless you.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Hey, cousin. Hey, line sister.
Hey,
Hey,
Mr. Edwards.
everybody.
Hey, Bridget.
Go Seminoles.
Good
night,
evening, y'all.
everyone.
Bye-bye.